Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. This reading is for Libra, Sun, Moon, Rising, Venus, and North Node. Take what resonates and simply leave the rest. If you enjoy these readings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for being here, for your support, your kindness, and for spending a little bit of your time with me today. Okay. As I was sitting with your energy, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone has been trying very hard to ignore what their heart already knows. Let's take a look and see what's really going on here. The first thing that catches my attention is this Two of Swords, and honestly, the moment I saw it, I felt exhausted. Not my own exhaustion, but theirs. It feels like someone has been standing at a crossroads for much longer than they should have. They keep telling themselves that they need more time, more information, more certainty, more proof. Yet every time they try to move away from this connection, something quietly pulls them right back toward you. I keep getting the sense that this person wants to appear calm on the outside, rational, controlled, like they have everything figured out. But beneath that surface, there is so much happening that they aren't talking about. It's almost like they've built an entire version of themselves around being logical, and now their heart is challenging everything they thought they knew. Okay. The Moon card is showing up here, and the energy immediately becomes deeper, softer, more emotional. This feels like someone lying awake longer than they planned to, someone replaying conversations, revisiting memories they thought they had already moved on from. For some of you, they may not even fully understand why they keep thinking about you. They just know that they do. And that's what feels complicated, because this isn't only about feelings, it's about fear. It's about what happens if they admit those feelings are real. What changes? What do they have to let go of? What do they have to face? There is something about this person that seems very attached to what feels familiar, even if familiar isn't making them happy anymore, even if familiar keeps them stuck in the same cycle. The energy suggests that they have spent a long time listening to outside voices, family expectations, old beliefs, past disappointments, the opinions of people who don't actually live inside their heart. Yet lately, those outside voices don't seem as loud as they used to, because another voice is getting stronger, their own. And that's where things start becoming difficult. I just pulled the Eight of Swords, and honestly, this feels like someone trapped inside their own mind. They keep going back and forth. One moment, they're convinced they need to leave everything exactly as it is. The next moment, they're imagining what would happen if they finally reached out to you. It's like watching someone argue with themselves. Their heart says one thing, their fear says another, their intuition says another, and somewhere in the middle, they feel frozen. I don't actually feel distance between you and this person in an emotional sense. What I feel is hesitation. I feel resistance. I feel someone standing in front of a door they desperately want to open, while continuously finding reasons not to touch the handle. And the longer they do that, the harder it becomes. Because your energy hasn't disappeared from their life, not emotionally, not mentally, not energetically. I keep seeing moments where something small reminds them of you. A song, a place, a random thought that arrives out of nowhere. The kind of memory that appears when they least expect it and stays much longer than they want it to. Okay, now we have the Page of Swords showing up. This card always gives me that feeling of quiet observation. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this person checks in on you more often than you realize. Not necessarily because they're trying to interfere, not because they're playing games. It feels more like they're trying to understand what place they still hold in your world. Have you moved on? Are you happy? Do you still think about them? They may never ask those questions directly, but I feel them wondering. I feel them searching. I feel them paying attention. What's interesting is that while they're observing you, they're also being forced to observe themselves. And that may actually be the harder part, because when they look honestly at this connection, they can no longer blame timing. They can no longer blame circumstances. They can no longer pretend that their feelings simply disappeared. Something inside them keeps returning to the same truth, again and again and again. For some of you, they've spent months trying to convince themselves that this connection wasn't as important as it felt. Yet every attempt to minimize it only seems to bring them closer to understanding how significant it actually is. Honestly, that's why this energy feels so emotional. Not because they're ready to rush forward, Not because every answer has suddenly appeared, but because the wall between their mind and their heart is beginning to crack. And once that starts happening, it's very difficult to go back to pretending. The energy feels like someone standing in the middle of a storm they created themselves, finally realizing they can no longer avoid choosing a direction. Because underneath all the confusion, all the hesitation, and all the fear, there seems to be a truth they've been carrying for much longer than they've admitted. And the moment they stop running from that truth, everything may begin to change. What I'm noticing here is that this person is starting to understand something they never really wanted to look at before. It feels like they always believed there would be another chance, another conversation, another opportunity to explain themselves, another moment where they could finally get it right. There was this quiet assumption that somehow you would always be there. And honestly, that's where some of the regret is coming from. Because life has a strange way of making people realize the value of something only after it begins to slip beyond their reach. The Six of Cups is sitting here now, and the energy immediately softens. Not in a dramatic way, not in a grand romantic gesture kind of way. It's quieter than that. More personal, more intimate. I keep seeing someone revisiting old memories they thought they had already packed away. Certain conversations keep replaying. Certain smiles. Certain moments that seemed ordinary at the time. The way you looked at them. The way you listened. The way you understood things they never had to explain. It's almost like these memories are returning with a completely different meaning. Because when those moments were happening, this person wasn't fully present. Part of them was distracted. Part of them was protecting themselves. Part of them was still convinced they had unlimited time. But looking back now, they see something they couldn't see then. They see your consistency. They see your patience. They see the effort you made when nobody else was paying attention. And for some of you, that realization is hitting them much harder than they expected. Okay, this Four of Pentacles energy is interesting, because while they're beginning to recognize your value, they're also realizing how tightly they've been holding on to their own fears. There is a possessiveness here, but it doesn't feel controlling. It feels desperate. Like someone suddenly noticing how much they still care after convincing themselves they didn't. I keep getting the sense that they check back on memories more often than they admit. Old messages, old pictures, small reminders, things they never completely let go of. And what's fascinating is that they may have acted detached on the outside while quietly holding on to every detail on the inside. You know, sometimes people don't realize they're emotionally attached until they're faced with the possibility of losing something. That's what this feels like. Not panic, not obsession. Just the slow realization that your absence would leave a much bigger space in their life than they ever expected. And that realization isn't comfortable, because it forces them to ask questions they've been avoiding. Why did they keep things so unclear? Why did they leave so much unsaid? Why did they make everything harder than it needed to be? The Seven of Swords appears here, and immediately I feel discomfort. Not because I feel bad intentions. Honestly, it feels more like avoidance. Like someone who wasn't being completely honest with themselves. Someone who kept finding ways to sidestep difficult conversations. Someone who thought they could postpone emotional accountability indefinitely. For some of you, this person knew exactly how much you cared. They knew. They just didn't know what to do with that knowledge. So instead of facing it directly, they created distance. They delayed decisions. They kept things vague. Not because they didn't feel anything, but because feeling something real was actually the scary part. And the energy suggests they're beginning to recognize how much confusion that created. How many times you were left wondering where you stood. How many times their actions failed to match what was happening in their heart. I keep hearing this internal conversation happening inside them, almost like they're reviewing everything through a new lens. Moments they once dismissed suddenly matter. Things they once overlooked suddenly feel important. And honestly, some of those realizations aren't easy for them to sit with, because they're starting to understand that certain wounds didn't come from what they said. They came from what they never said. Certain disappointments didn't come from actions. They came from inaction, from hesitation, from waiting too long. Okay, and here comes justice. The atmosphere changes immediately. Everything feels quieter, more reflective, more honest. This doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like awareness. Like someone standing in front of a mirror they can no longer avoid. And for the first time, they're seeing both sides of the story. Not just their fears, not just their excuses, not just their perspective. They're beginning to see yours, too. They're beginning to understand what this experience felt like from where you were standing. And that changes everything. Because empathy has a way of breaking down walls that logic cannot. I keep getting the sense that they're realizing you were never asking for perfection. You weren't asking them to have every answer. You weren't asking them to be someone else. You were asking for honesty, for clarity, for consistency. And somehow those simple things became much harder than they needed to be. The interesting thing is that this awareness isn't pushing them away from you. It's pulling them closer. Because the more clearly they see what happened, the more clearly they see your value. The more clearly they see your value, the harder it becomes to imagine simply letting this connection disappear. There is something growing here. Something that wasn't fully developed before. Something that can only emerge after a person stops blaming circumstances and starts looking inward. And honestly, I don't think they're finished uncovering those truths yet. Because what I'm seeing next suggests there's an even deeper shift happening beneath the surface. One that may force them to completely rethink who they've been and who they want to become. The energy becomes incredibly intense here. Not chaotic on the outside, not dramatic in the way people usually imagine. This feels internal, quiet, personal. The kind of transformation that happens when someone is alone with their thoughts and suddenly realizes they can't keep telling themselves the same story anymore. Okay, judgment is showing up. And honestly, the moment I see this card, it feels like someone waking up from a very long sleep. Not literally, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. It's almost as if they've been moving through life on autopilot, following familiar patterns, repeating familiar choices, convincing themselves that everything was fine because it was comfortable. But comfort and happiness are not always the same thing. And I think that's something they're beginning to understand. I keep getting the sense that this realization didn't happen all at once. It feels like little cracks forming over time. Small moments that didn't make sense. Situations that kept repeating. Feelings they couldn't ignore. Questions that refused to disappear. Until eventually they reached a point where pretending became more exhausting than facing the truth. And that's when everything started shifting. The tower appears beside judgment, and immediately I feel this pressure building. For some of you, this may have been triggered by something happening in their personal life. A relationship ending, a friendship changing, a disappointment, a setback. Something that forced them to stop and look around. Because whatever structure they were leaning on before doesn't seem as stable as they once believed. What's fascinating is that I don't feel this experience as punishment. It feels more like exposure, like life pulling back a curtain, showing them things they previously refused to see. And one of those things seems to be the role they played in their own unhappiness. That's a difficult realization, because when someone spends a long time focusing on circumstances, it's easy to believe the problem is always somewhere outside of themselves. But this person is beginning to recognize patterns. Patterns that followed them from one chapter of life into another. Patterns that existed long before you entered the picture. Patterns they can no longer blame on anyone else. Honestly, I feel humility here. Not shame, not self-hatred. Humility. The kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly for the first time. The kind that says, maybe I wasn't as honest with myself as I thought I was. The kind that says, maybe I hurt people while trying to protect myself. And that's where the emotional weight begins to settle in. Because as they're reflecting on the past, they're also reflecting on you. I keep seeing moments where they suddenly understand things that didn't make sense before. Things you tried to communicate. Things you tried to show them. Things they dismissed because they weren't ready to hear them. It's almost frustrating. Like realizing the answer was sitting right in front of you the entire time. And that's why this energy feels so raw, because awareness changes everything. The moment you truly see something, you can't unsee it. The moment you understand something, you can't unknow it. And that's exactly where they seem to be. Okay, death is coming through now. And honestly, this feels much more emotional than physical. I don't feel them walking away from you. I feel them walking away from a version of themselves. the version that avoided difficult conversations, the version that delayed decisions, the version that convinced itself that vulnerability was weakness, the version that kept choosing what was familiar over what was meaningful. Something about that old identity feels exhausted, like it has finally reached the end of its road. I keep hearing this phrase in my mind, I can't keep doing this. Not directed toward you, directed toward themselves, directed toward the cycles they've been repeating, directed toward the fear that's been making their decisions for them. Because fear can feel safe for a while, until it starts costing you the things that matter. And I think they're beginning to see that cost, more clearly than ever before. The hermit is here too, and the energy immediately slows down. Everything becomes quieter, more reflective, more thoughtful. This feels like someone pulling away from distractions, pulling away from noise, trying to understand what their own heart is actually saying beneath everyone else's expectations. For some of you, they may seem distant right now. Not because they don't care, not because they're moving on. Honestly, it feels like they're trying to make sense of themselves. They're trying to understand why this connection still matters, why your presence continues to linger in their thoughts, why every road they travel somehow seems to lead them back to the same emotional place, you. And what stands out most is that they're no longer asking whether these feelings exist. That question seems settled. The question they're wrestling with now is what they're going to do about them. Because awareness creates responsibility. Once they recognize what they feel, once they recognize the impact of their actions, once they recognize what they've been avoiding, they can no longer hide behind confusion. I keep seeing someone standing at the edge of a completely different chapter, not fully inside it yet, not fully ready to step forward, but no longer able to return to who they used to be. And honestly, that's a very vulnerable place to stand. Because transformation sounds beautiful until you're the one living through it. Until you're the one letting go of old beliefs. Until you're the one admitting mistakes. Until you're the one facing everything you've spent years avoiding. Yet despite how uncomfortable this process feels, there is something growing stronger inside them. Something more honest. Something more certain. Something that seems determined to guide them toward what truly matters. And the deeper they move into that realization, the harder it becomes to ignore the person who has quietly remained in their heart through every stage of this journey. There is something very different about the energy here. Softer, warmer, almost as if the pressure they've been carrying starts giving way to something more honest. Because once someone stops running from themselves, they begin noticing things they overlooked before. And honestly, I feel like that's exactly what's happening. The Eight of Pentacles is sitting in front of me, and the first thing I notice is how focused this person has become. It's almost funny because there was a time when their attention seemed scattered in every direction. They were distracted by responsibilities, distractions, expectations, and everything happening around them. Yet lately, their attention keeps finding its way back to you. Not intentionally, not because they're forcing it. It feels natural, like a compass slowly correcting itself. I keep seeing them replaying conversations, not the dramatic moments, not the arguments, not the painful parts, the small moments, the moments most people forget. The way you laughed at something completely random, the way your voice softened when you were talking about something important to you, the way you always seemed to understand what wasn't being said. And it's strange because these memories seem to carry more weight now than they did when they first happened. Almost like they're finally seeing the emotional value hidden inside those moments. Okay, this feels important, because I don't just feel nostalgia, I feel appreciation, and there's a difference. Nostalgia misses the past. Appreciation recognizes the value of what was there all along. This person is beginning to see you through a completely different lens, a much clearer one. The Nine of Pentacles appears here, and immediately I get this sense of admiration. Deep admiration. They look at you and see someone who continued growing, someone who continued moving forward, someone who learned how to stand in their own energy, even when life wasn't easy. And honestly, I think part of what fascinates them is that you never became what they expected. You became more confident, more grounded, more secure. For some of you, they genuinely thought that distance would make you smaller in some way, that life would pause, that your world would somehow wait for them. Instead, they watched you continue becoming yourself. And there is something incredibly attractive about that from their perspective. Not only physically, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. It's like they're finally recognizing a strength in you that they couldn't fully appreciate before. I keep hearing this thought inside their mind. Why do I keep comparing everyone to them? Because that's another thing happening here. Whether they admit it or not, people have come and gone through their life. Conversations happened, experiences happened. Yet somehow those comparisons keep leading back to the same place. Back to you. Back to the way they felt around you. Back to the sense of ease that existed whenever they stopped trying to control everything. And honestly, that realization seems to catch them off guard. Because they're beginning to understand that what they shared with you wasn't something they experienced often. The High Priestess is here now, and everything becomes very quiet, very still, very intimate. This feels like the moments nobody else sees, the moments when they're alone, driving somewhere, lying awake, staring out a window, trying to distract themselves but failing. Because underneath all the thoughts, there is this undeniable awareness of your presence. I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally. It's almost like they feel connected to you even during periods of silence, even during periods when nothing is happening externally. And that confuses them sometimes, because they're used to understanding things logically. They're used to explaining everything. But this connection doesn't seem interested in fitting inside neat explanations. It simply exists. The energy suggests they're beginning to trust what they feel, rather than immediately questioning it. And honestly, that's a huge shift. Because this person spent so much time arguing with their own emotions, trying to rationalize them, trying to dismiss them, trying to explain them away. Yet the more they sit with themselves, the more impossible that becomes. Okay, the Hierophant just came out, and the atmosphere changes again. There is a seriousness here that wasn't present before. Not pressure, not obligation, just sincerity. I keep getting the sense that they're starting to look beyond temporary feelings, beyond fleeting emotions, beyond attraction alone. They're asking deeper questions, questions they may never have asked themselves before. What does stability actually feel like? Who do I trust? Who brings peace into my life rather than confusion? Who consistently showed up with honesty? And every time they follow those questions honestly, they seem to arrive at the same answer. There is something about you that feels different from everyone else they've encountered. Not because you're perfect, not because either of you are without flaws. It feels deeper than that. You feel real to them, authentic, safe, grounding, like someone they don't have to perform around, someone they don't have to become somebody else for. And honestly, that's a rare feeling, especially for someone who spent so much of their life hiding parts of themselves. I keep seeing them recognize this little by little, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. Not through dramatic revelations, not through sudden miracles, through understanding, through reflection, through seeing the truth more clearly than they ever have before. And the more clearly they see it, the more difficult it becomes to ignore where their heart keeps leading them. Because what started as memories is slowly becoming something else, something stronger, something more intentional, something that seems to be pushing them toward a decision they can no longer postpone forever. The energy shifts again here, not dramatically, not in a rushed or impulsive way. It feels deliberate, measured, like someone carefully considering every step before they take it. Okay, the Ace of Pentacles is sitting right in front of me, and honestly, this feels like the first time in a long time that they're thinking about possibilities instead of limitations. For so long, their attention seemed focused on everything that could go wrong, everything they couldn't control, everything that felt uncertain. Yet something inside them is beginning to ask a different question. What if this could actually work? And that's a powerful shift. Because when someone starts looking for possibilities instead of obstacles, their entire perspective begins to change. I keep getting the sense that they're imagining conversations, not imaginary fantasies, real conversations. The kind where they finally sit down with you and speak honestly. The kind where there are no games, no confusion, no walls, no pretending. Just truth. And honestly, I don't think that's easy for them, because vulnerability still feels unfamiliar, even after everything they've learned. Even after everything they've realized, there is still a part of them that worries. What if it's too late? What if you've changed? What if you've stopped caring? What if they've already missed their chance? Those questions seem to visit them often. Yet what's interesting is that those fears no longer appear strong enough to stop them completely. They're still there, but they're losing their power. The King of Cups is showing up here, and the energy becomes incredibly mature, grounded, steady. There is something beautiful about this, because earlier it felt like they were fighting their emotions, trying to escape them, trying to analyze them away. This feels different. This feels like acceptance, like someone finally sitting with their feelings instead of running from them. And once that happens, clarity begins to emerge. I keep hearing them acknowledge things internally that they may never have admitted before. How much they care, how often they think about you, how deeply this connection affected them, how much your absence changed things, and perhaps most importantly, how much they genuinely want to make things right. Not because they feel guilty, not because they're lonely, not because they're afraid, but because they understand the value of what they almost lost. Honestly, that's the part that stands out the most. This doesn't feel like someone chasing comfort. It feels like someone moving toward truth. The energy suggests they've reached a point where excuses no longer satisfy them, where avoidance no longer feels easier, where silence feels heavier than honesty. And that's creating movement. Slow movement, careful movement, but movement nonetheless. Okay, the Fool appears, and immediately I feel nervous excitement. The kind that happens right before a person takes a leap they can't completely predict. I don't feel recklessness here. I feel courage. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that shows up when someone decides something matters more than their fear. Because that's really what this is. For some of you, they're preparing themselves emotionally. For others, they may be thinking about what they want to say, how they want to say it, when they want to say it. I even feel them revising conversations inside their mind, starting over, changing words, trying again, searching for the right approach. Because they don't want to repeat old mistakes. That's important. They don't want another cycle. They don't want another misunderstanding. They don't want another opportunity slipping through their hands because they hesitated too long. And honestly, that awareness seems to be motivating them more than anything else. I keep seeing someone becoming increasingly uncomfortable with standing still. Because standing still used to feel safe. Standing still used to protect them from risk. Standing still used to allow them to avoid difficult emotions. But standing still also kept them separated from what they truly wanted. And they know that now. They really do. The Nine of Cups appears and everything softens once more. There is a warmth here that wasn't present at the beginning of this story. A sense of emotional honesty. A sense of emotional alignment. Almost like pieces that have been scattered for a very long time are finally beginning to come together. I keep getting the sense that when they picture happiness, your face keeps appearing somewhere inside that vision. Not because they've idealized you, not because they think life would suddenly become perfect. It feels much simpler than that. You bring them peace. You bring them comfort. You bring them a feeling of authenticity that they've struggled to find elsewhere. And the more honest they become with themselves, the more impossible it becomes to deny that. Honestly, I feel excitement building beneath the surface. Not loud excitement, not dramatic excitement, the kind that quietly grows inside someone when they know they're approaching an important turning point. A moment that could change the direction of their story. A moment they've imagined countless times, but never fully believed would arrive. Because after everything they've gone through internally, after all the fear, all the confusion, all the resistance, there seems to be one final realization settling into place. They don't want to keep wondering what could have happened. They don't want to keep carrying words that were never spoken. They don't want to keep watching this connection from a distance. And as that realization becomes impossible to ignore, it feels like they're getting closer and closer to doing something they once believed they would never have the courage to do. All right, you guys, that's all I have for this reading. I have to be honest, this energy feels like someone who is getting closer and closer to a truth they've been avoiding for a very long time. So we'll see where this goes. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Thank you for all the love, all the support, all the comments, and for being part of this amazing community. It truly means more than you know. If this reading resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts below. I always enjoy hearing your stories. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!